Hi, this is Bill Hartzer, and this is the Digital Marketing Podcast with Bill Hartzer. And today I have Franco Valentino here talking about technical SEO. And welcome, Franco. Tell me a little bit about you and your background.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Bill. My name is
Sure.
Franco Valentino. Yep, I'm with Narrative SEO, and we're a technical SEO firm out of Nashville, Tennessee. We work with some of the largest HubSpot agencies on the planet and do hundreds of technical deep dive audits for e-commerce and sites that produce a lot of leads and revenue.
Sure. So technical SEO, I've been doing, SEO since the 90s. And in fact, I've kind of noticed a trend that now, people are calling it, there's a specific distinction now between technical SEO and SEO. And there's, a lot of people just say, oh, well, they do SEO, but it's, there's actually something about, technical SEO that's a little bit different than normal SEO. So what would you say the distinction between the two are?
Well, that's a great question, and we actually get asked that a lot. And when you think of SEO, you think of the normal on-page things, right? I've got to optimize my title tags and my meta descriptions and all of those wonderful things that we know to work. In technical SEO, we actually start sort of at the digital interconnections underneath the covers, right? So we look at the server, we look at the greater internet and how it connects to the website, and then search engine's ability to crawl the website, which can actually produce some pretty remarkable results if you find something wrong. So that's a clear distinction, even though they're tightly woven together.
So, technical SEO, I think more about the code and, the actual, not necessarily just, oh, we need to have, this particular content and this particular, mention these words on the page and these related words, and we need to get these links. But, in fact, technical SEO gets a little bit more into actually optimizing the code. And, I guess a little bit, one particular way, to kind of explain it is, you look at the code and you're mentioning, and you're all the text on the page is, say, in Arial font or one particular font. And one way to kind of optimize that code would be to, not have to, not specify that it's an Arial font every time, every paragraph or every section of the page, because the whole thing is in Arial font. So you tell it, okay, this is Arial font at the beginning, and then you tell it, that it's at the end and that it's not Arial font anymore. So rather than having the extra code around every single paragraph of text that says, oh, this is Arial font, 10 point bold or whatever, you have, specify it on and off and on and off and so forth. And that's, getting a little bit into the code. Right. And so that's one way by kind of optimizing it, meaning not from an SEO perspective, but, having less code, you have the same, web design, the same interface. It looks exactly the same, but you're getting rid of all the useless stuff. And that kind of gets into, technical SEO, but we want to actually optimize those pages so they load a lot faster and there's obviously a better user experience, right?
Exactly. And to your point about not only the font and replication of code and responses, it can get into, technical SEO gets into, for example, JavaScript, right? The number of scripts that load on the page is very important. And if you can reduce those or even join them together and send them in one batch, that can tend to help. So, as technical SEOs, we live in a constant state of overwhelm. There's just too much to do all the time. So we try to fit a lens over the website and say, okay, what are the most important things that we can do? Sort of the 80-20. Right, the Pareto features that are going to give us leverage results. And with that, we have sort of a 10 technical SEO must-haves that we always start with. And I'm sure you've heard this, or everyone has heard this a million times before, is web speed, right? How do we optimize web speed? There's 50 different ways to improve a website, but what are the things that can actually make an immediate difference? And to that end, I think we should discuss a little bit, it's not just the on-page side, but what's happening on the server. Is the host a good host, right? Is it a good server? Is the database of your CMS optimized? And we typically start there because everything uses a database, right? Whether it's an IIS or a Linux server or Nginx or Apache. Typically people don't do this. Like even the server admins know to do this, but it's just something off the radar, and there's not really a result here. Like, something is warning you, but just optimizing your database can improve your website by a second or two. And that's globally. That's not just page by page. So all of a sudden you get greater Google footprint, potential search visibility improvements as well. But more importantly, the user experience gets better. And Google themselves, or Think with Google and other platforms that have done the big data research on this, for every second of load time in e-commerce, for example, that's about a 7% increase in conversion, that drop if it slows down. Amazon's published some numbers a few years ago that, for every 10th of a second they slow down, it's about $4 million. So, this is critical to do this. And, literally just that one thing. And then the next most important thing, as far as we look at, is optimizing the images. Because the images are global. There are theme images that come in from, whatever theme, for example, in WordPress or HubSpot that you bring in. They're typically either too large for the viewport, where they're getting seen on the page, or they're just not optimized, or the wrong file format. So global image optimization is typically, again, exceedingly good for the website, and it's fairly simple to accomplish. So those are the kind of first steps, and then we get into things like PHP versions and such.
Yeah, so PHP versions, that's common with WordPress sites, because, in a lot of, smaller business sites, or even sites that, and so there is a way actually if you're running cPanel, for example, there's a way to go in cPanel and actually change the version of WordPress, or not WordPress, but of PHP rather. And, I think it's called multi PHP, and you can change to a newer version, or the latest version. And, I noticed a fair amount of sites, WordPress sites, are actually still on PHP 5 and just moving it up to 7, for example. And maybe that WordPress site's been around for 3 or 4 years, or even longer. So that's definitely the time to go ahead and and update it. And then obviously you can do that switch, check to see if the site's still working. Obviously any there may be some plugin issues that may cause some issues, but then obviously keeping having basically turning off or deactivating, and removing certain plugins, WordPress plugins that you're not using, or ones that you just may have features that you just that are not really useful anymore. And so that's not only a security issue, but obviously every plugin has extra code that has to execute or run. Right.
Yeah, let's unpack the PHP thing a little bit more, because what you mentioned, 5.6, or the older versions of PHP 5x, those were deprecated and they're not supported anymore. So there are still bug problems with that. So not only is your website slower because of an older version, but it's also at risk for security. If you do happen to see that your website is a PHP 5.x, immediately update it, whether visual design breaks or not, right? To at least 7.2, and there's a host of other benefits too. If you go from 7.2 to 7.3, that's about a 25% speed improvement just by switching the driver. 7.4 just came out. So, and again, to your point, some hosts will do it in cPanel. WP Engine, for example, they have a selector where you can just turn it on and pre-test your site. HostGator and all those guys will have some version of, or just open a ticket at your web host and ask them to update it. Most modern themes in WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, they all support upgrades to PHP, and they're critically important at this point. So, and then plugins. Great point about plugins. If you don't need a plugin, or you disabled it because you didn't need it anymore, but it's still in there, take it out, right? Because it's a code bloat. The code still has to load on every single page of the website. So you're unnecessarily slowing your website down just by having them in your plugin repository.
Yeah, let's shift some gears right now. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about crawling and indexing, and I know that's big, definitely an issue that a lot of people are concerned about. because I can tell you that I've noticed, being kind of in the industry for a while, I've noticed there was a big shift. I would say about a year or two ago, and how Google has been uh, crawling and indexing sites. They kind of they've it used to be that they would crawl and index just about any page you threw at them, but there's a very distinct change in their policy, I would say, that they're not indexing they're crawling, but they're not indexing as many pages as they used to, and they're getting more pickier about it, especially with large sites. I have some clients that have millions of pages, and you'll go into Google Search Console, which obviously you need to verify your site in Google Search Console, hopefully also in Bing Webmaster Tools. But you'll go in there, and there's a lot of crawl data that they provide us, and we can see which page has been crawled or discovered and not crawled, or crawled and not indexed.
Right.
And so it can be concerning to certain clients that they'll go in and see that, hey, they have 250,000 pages that have been crawled but are not indexed.
Right, and that has to do, between the crawl and what Googlebot is doing on the site, and then analyzing where you might have where there may be content that is considered duplicate enough on your own site, because you were talking about similar themes, that canonicalizing them
Sure.
sometimes can actually push the crawler over to the page you do on index. So, and I think you and I have talked about log files as well before. And that's
Yep.
a critical piece too. There can be a difference between what Google Search Console tells you and what a crawler would tell you by analyzing or pulling the log files off of the server. That becomes very, very important or critical in e-commerce situations, because you have one master product like a sneaker, for example, and then you have 50 or 100 variations of that sneaker. So what page gets the keywords for that? Right. So if you can analyze what the crawler is doing and say, hey, the black version of this running shoe is getting over optimized when it should be the main category for the running shoe. So potentially no index, and then categorize or canonicalize it to the main page. But those are the types of insights that you wouldn't have normally if you don't have a log file to analyze to begin with. All right.
Sure. And so obviously, just to kind of be a little clear also, is that, obviously any hit or any time your web page or even a image file or any file is loaded on your server, and a PDF, that, anytime that's loaded on your server, the log file basically says the date and the time and the IP address and the referring data and so forth of, and some data about that particular visit. And whereas something like Google Analytics is not necessarily, they may see that data, but it actually has to execute JavaScript and in order to register that view. And then we have the issue with Google filtering out bots and filtering out certain traffic and so forth, that in that particular case. So there may be, for example, if you analyze log files and compare those with, all the URLs seen in log files, compare those to all the pages that you find during a crawl on of the site, there can be differences. Like, for example, your PDFs. If a lot of B2B companies will have PDF files that will rank well, and
Right.
people will go directly to the PDF file to download it from the search results, and that data is not going to be in Google Analytics.
Right.
And so
Right.
critical to see that information, in your log files, versus what's in
Right.
analytics.
Yeah, and you make another really good point that if you do have something like a PDF, we work with a client that's an engineering firm, and they have a lot of technical specification PDFs. Is having a
Sure.
site maps are also critically important. I think we were talking about indexing and visibility.
Yep.
Having deliberate site maps and making sure that you have a site map even by subdomain, if you do have some important data within a subdomain on your website, to feed those particular site maps to Google if you want them indexed, and then reading through the log files to see what the crawler is doing with them. So this is another really good technical SEO optimization, meaning some of the CMSs, like WordPress, you can put a plugin in. There's a host of them that will generate a sitemap for you, but not just turning it on and leaving the default in there. Actually specifying. Sometimes your page builder will actually create a custom post type, for example, and
Sure.
put it in a sitemap. You don't actually want that crawl because it's just extra data that is not providing any value to the user. So you can sort of manage the crawler and tell Google, knock on the door, hey, these are the things that I want you to rank for me, and these are things I don't want. So that becomes critically important. And then that sort of segues into the robots TXT file, where, this is a hard signal of please don't, you're not allowed to see this folder or category because this is my gated content, for example. We don't want that index because it's a lead magnet, for example. I want to trade an email for this particular value. So looking at those, again, is managing your crawl budget, because Google has to go crawl, and Bing has to go crawl trillions of websites every day. So critically important, especially in the larger e-commerce that have a lot of hierarchy, correct?
So let's talk schema a little bit. More importantly, I've been a fan of the Google, watching the Google Knowledge Graph, and in fact, and I've been, I would say back, I think it was about early 2010, 2009, 2010, and so forth, when I first got into the knowledge graph, through a site that provided data to the knowledge graph. And so I've been looking at that and looking now at entities, and there's actually ways in using schema code to help the search engines understand what the topic of the page is, and there's certain schema that you can schema code that you can add and say, hey, this page is about real estate, or this page is about domain names, or this and so forth, but that's only one small little part of schema. We talk things, local businesses. I first think of, okay, well, let's mention the name on the page. Let's mention the name, address, and phone number. But what's also, have the JSON LD local schema on there that also has, tells them about this is the name, address, and phone number. What other types of schema that you recommend adding?
Sure, and this is let's talk a little bit about the reason behind it, and then we'll get into sort of the 80-20 of that portion. Is search engines have changed from word match engines, essentially, right? They saw a word on a page, somebody searched for it, and all of a sudden they would rank that page, to AIs that are trying to become more like a human brain, that understand meaning and relationships between nouns, basically between things, right? So if I'm trying to understand, if I search Brad Pitt, for example, right, which one should come up, right? As far as meaning, there may be 10,000 Brad Pitts in the country, but one of them has a lot of different profiles, a lot of backlinks, a lot of schema attached to other very important things. So the likelihood and relevancy of that is how what they're trying to do. So the search engines actually came up with a working committee a few years. This was Google, Bing, Yahoo, Yandex, and Baidu. Said, look, we need a way for people to tell us what their websites are about versus us having to crawl it and figure it out ourselves. That the protocol that came out of that was schema.org. Right. So now this is 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, but now we have a really rich data set of templates, essentially, that we can pick and choose from, that we can wrap around our website. And one of the easiest examples to get our heads around is the review stars. When you're sitting on Google and you see the little 5 stars on a website, that is actually implemented via schema markup, right? And to your point, the language they use is JSON LD. You can use microdata. There are some older versions, but it's very dynamic, and every day the organizing body of these templates comes out with more templates. You mentioned real estate. Real estate is a critical one, because imagine that you can all of a sudden have a listing template within schema and wrap that on the listing HTML page that you have on your website. All of a sudden, Google doesn't have to read the whole website. They can just read the header where the schema is located, understand everything about that listing, and then subsequently place it when a local searcher is looking for that open house, for example. So this is this is really for us. We're going heavy and deep into schema markup because it is the next. It's SEO 2.0 is the way that we're looking at it, and it's producing some outsized results, because imagine you could write your own entry in Google about what your organization is about, including what products and services you have, and what related websites and what that thing you do is about. So that's the way we look at it. So to answer your question, what are the most important ones? Organizational schema is critically important. There's thousands of fields in there, but if you could just feed, this is my brand, this is what we do, this is the year we were founded, and here's our social profile links. At its most basic, that is a really good entity signal, because people, as you advertise, they look for your name, boom, you should come up. That makes it easier for Google to understand that. When you start talking about e-commerce, it becomes a lot more important, because product and service schema wraps pretty much anything that has to do with e-commerce, and they move the review stars over to those codes. It used to be in local business and organization, but they actually they move the review schema template into product and service. So that caused a lot of waves recently online, because people were scamming a little bit, because it was really easy to do. So you can get, globally on your website review stars. So they tightened down, but it's still a big differentiator, because websites that have those little review stars, it's somewhere north of a 15% CTR increase. And this is some of Google data that they published. So if you're the only one with those review stars, you have a much higher likelihood of getting the click and subsequently the traffic. So schema is really where it's at, and I think it's going to get more important. So, and it's difficult to do. It's code. So, there's some basic plugins you can add. I know in eShopify, if we have any eShopify folks listening, there are 2 plugins that do schema. One will let you customize, and one gives you kind of the basics, but it's pretty good. At least you have it versus not having it. So definitely look into it and amplify that as much as you can, because you will get better results versus your competitors.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, there have been anything like that benefits the website and gets better rankings and traffic. There are going to be those out there that will, take advantage of it. And so, certainly there are certainly guidelines to implementing it. Certainly, you don't want to actually, one example would be, I've seen sites that really don't have products; they just have kind of services, and they have just thrown in those review stars, and there's not really any way, any way to add to add a review or to add a star on their website. They just have decided to to throw the stars code on there. Google decides, in fact, whether or not to show those stars or not in certain cases. But anyway, so yes, definitely that I would put schema in more of a, more of in the technical SEO part.
Right.
And you actually kind of have to know kind of how to implement it, how to read the code, and certainly get into kind of tricky situations where if you don't really know, can't really understand the code, just one semicolon or one character that's deleted or added can totally screw up the code. So, obviously putting it into Google's schema markup checker will check the schema code. And I've even seen some interesting cases where there's some software out there that will allow you to put a keyword in the search. You start with a keyword. Mm-hmm. It will actually go do a search at Google and essentially scrape the search results and find all the schema that everybody else has added on their website, and then gives you a dump of that data that you can then put on your own site. And so you can actually, there are ways that, in some cases, if we talk more, I would say more B2B industry cases where websites, a lot of websites don't have schema. There are sites that have been built, more either 3 to 5 or more years ago. They definitely typically don't have schema. So actually, if you're in a B2B situation, you might want to actually implement that, because there's a lot of opportunities, especially with FAQ pages and with Google showing the feature, people also asked and so forth. There's a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets, I mean, it's like anything, you can drill down and get as advanced as you like, but there are some low hanging fruit opportunities with schema and different CMSs. So for example, like BigCommerce, if some e-commerce shops, they have schema built into
Yeah,
the platform. Magento has some
sure,
level of it as well. And Shopify, again, we discussed it, it's got a couple plugins. With something like WordPress, you would need Yoast SEO has some basic features to it. There's also, there are a handful of advanced SEO plugins that will add another level where you can customize schema templates, or copy them off of schema.org and then customize them, because the code examples are on there within the templates. But definitely something to look into, because it is where search is going, and it can put your website into different features, into different SERP features. On mobile, for example, the carousels, that's assisted by schema events. It's a very good way of doing your events. It's almost, it's one of the preferred ways of getting your event, or the thing that you're trying to promote as an event, like a webinar, for example, with expanded features where people can save them to their phones. Look at the
sure.
venues, for example. The review stars for the venues can be on there. So again, just added benefit to the end user, which can get you, that click and conversion at the end of the day.
Sure. And if you want to test around, a little bit, you can actually, technicalseo.com actually has a schema generator
Hmm.
app, and there's actually, several schema generators out there. You can do a search. I know even on my site, I have a basic schema generator. And basically, one of the things, for example, you pick the type of schema, you fill out a form, and it'll automatically generate the code.
Right.
FAQ page schema, for example, you put in your question, you put in the answer, you generate it, and it'll give you the code that you can literally copy and paste. You can literally copy and paste the code like into the text area of WordPress,
Right.
either before or after the content, and then it's there on the page.
Right.
And so that thing, so if you want to do some basic testing without having to buy plugins and get into all that technical stuff, if you want to actually just test around with different types of schema, like on a blog or something like that, article or blog post schema, and so forth, that's one option.
Right. No, that's a great point. So I know we're getting fairly advanced with this stuff, but when we talk about technical SEO, again, to our first part of conversation versus regular SEO, we always
Sure.
try to start with the basics, because we see 90% of the time the basics are still unoptimized. There's always a lot of low hanging fruit that can, the 80-20, fix 20% of this stuff, you'll get 80% better in whatever you're trying to accomplish by
Yep.
looking at the SEO basics, especially from the technical side. We talked about PHP, the images, your database optimization. And if you're on a shared server, that's really, if you're paying $2 a month for a server, you really should have a dedicated server if your website is important to you, because the caliber of the machine will be better, right? The memory, the hard drive, the speed at which it can deliver the pages. And in some instances, just adding a free account of Cloudflare can provide a
Sure.
lot of that speed boost as well, because it helps distribute your site and optimize your images, as well as compress the file with Brotli compression versus gzip between the browser and the server. And that's about a 30% speed improvement. So a lot of very easy technical things that can be implemented in the short term while you work on the longer term, content and upgrading your keywords and such.
Sure. So we're just about out of time. Why don't you tell me a little bit how to get in touch with you, and a little bit about your web address, and I know you're on Twitter as well.
Yep, thank you. So Franco at Narrative SEO. The website is narrativeseo.com. And I
Okay.
am on Twitter at Franco Valentino. Thanks for having me, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Val. Thanks, Franco. This has been the Digital Marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast. Thanks again, and we've been talking about technical SEO. Thanks again.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good day.